I'm gonna show you crochet maintenance, promise. It's just not right away, because check this out. The first thing I'm gonna show you is...
So if you don't know, my name is Shane Fallon. This is where we talk about hair. I've been studying hair since 2006, and I first started wearing locks on my head and studying locks back in '99. So you can imagine I might have a little info for you.
Fingers, dude, still fucked up from the last time I did maintenance just a couple of weeks ago. Oh, hopefully that zoomed in on it. Check this out too. All of it, everywhere. Not everywhere, but definitely in these spaces where the angle is fucked up. It's not fucked up. You get tired and you start going at the wrong angle, and it actually want to be going at an angle that's out from the head, and it's so hard to get on our own. It's so much easier for a loctician to get it from behind the chair. So that means that, like, after about 3 of them, when I do all of my maintenance at once, all of the other ones get shit maintenance because I'm tired as hell by that time. And so, I mean, and that's me, and I've been doing this stuff for years. I do want to get into crochet maintenance with you guys. First though, we're going to go into subsection 1A of at-home maintenance, and really that's because most people are going to either have a loctician, have started them from a loctician, or whatever. Subsection 1A is for between your loctician visits. There's a very big difference between seeing a loctician and maintaining your hair and maintaining all of your own hair. You can be more vigorous and more rough with things when you're doing it yourself and not utilizing crochet, not utilizing combs, not utilizing gels. Right now we're going to get into more what you do between visits with a loctician. For someone who's going regularly to a loctician, I usually see people within 8 weeks. So every 8 weeks or so to 10 weeks or so, maybe 12, you're going to see somebody and getting it tightened up. Well, in between that, it gets loose like this. There's a few things we need to be doing in between. And most of that dials down into, we've woven our hair into a fabric. We know what the main goal is of maintenance, which is to keep the hair into the lock and comb it up in and keep it growing like that. That's our main goal of maintenance. Then in between maintenance appointments, our main job is to be stretching out our locks after we get them wet. It's to be separating everything to make sure nothing's growing together. And it's to be really minutely making things the way that we want them. If we want those nice round ropes, we have to make them that way. You don't want to do anything really with your hair after you've had it all crocheted and tight for at least 2 weeks. If you're getting things twisted, then you don't want to do much with your hair until you're about 2 to 3 weeks from seeing your loctician. It's when you take things out, shampoo, kind of go through having loose locks for a little bit, maybe even utilize a comb and kind of comb some of that loose hair up in there so that it stays for your next visit to your loctician, so that some of it doesn't fall out in your shampoo sets. Elsewise, you should have 2 or 3 weeks of like loose hair and then go see your loctician. Now you're tight and you leave with crochet. You also don't really do much with your hair for 2 to 3 weeks. After that first shampoo, after 2 to 3 weeks or so, things kind of get loosened up a little bit. You can kind of do stuff really finger brushing between stuff almost every night, right? Especially if you're wearing things like beanies, head wraps, different stuff like that. Definitely if you're doing this whole 3-piece bun thing like every day, you want to pull that out often, and don't ever leave something in a ponytail more than 24 hours or a bun or anything like that. Pull everything out and take it apart and go through and finger brush everything different directions, and you're using really good pressure with your finger. Anything that catches, you just rip through. Now beyond that, when you start getting like I am already, which I shouldn't be by now, the next part is to get all of the hair that goes into that lock. You'll be able to see the way that the dread moves. You want to go in that direction. You want to spiral it around the lock in the direction that it goes. And you can leave that. And that's helping everything get separated. It's also helping you get to know your locks better. It's also helping all of these little loose hairs to stay separated. Now, this is great to do after you've gotten it wet. This is for crochet locks that I'm talking about after you've shampooed that first or even second time. Maybe you're going out and you've got all of this stuff starting to happen and it's getting closer to seeing your loctician. Well, this is something you can easily do when you get out of the shower, before you pull your hair up or do any of that stuff or dry it or whatever, is go through and make sure everything is separated and around the lock it should be in. And you can do that through the whole entire head, and you lay them softly like that, or pin them up or something. You find some way to keep them all doing the same thing while you go through the entire head and do it. And then you take everything and pull it up in the way that you want to pull it up or whatever, and you won't have any of this stuff showing. And you can go out and have your hair pulled. Now that also helps separate everything and do everything that you can kind of have that up for a while, right? Not like long time, but you can have it up for more, like somebody who does twist and lock who has it up for weeks at a time. You could at least have it up for 3 or 4 days. In the first 4 or 5 weeks you have after you've seen a loctician, it's not a whole lot of that stuff you need to do, right? It's mostly when you get it wet that you need to pay attention to stretching your sweater out before it dries. That's pretty much the majority. And then the other palm rolling is done that last 3 weeks before you see a loctician. That whole separating stuff is like, one, your hair shouldn't necessarily fall out that greatly. Things like this, that's a little excessive. This kind of stuff, that should be closer to when you see your loctician, right? If you saw a twist and lock, it would be kind of, you'd have loose hairs too, and it would be more of a spongy squish. We have more of a spiral that'll kind of spiral in and out. That also shows you which way your locks want to spiral. If your locks aren't showing which way you want to spiral yet, they will in the first year. They might not be yet, but like generally more of your locks will end up with this crisscrossy weird shit that's going on. And for people whose locks that do that a lot anyways, maybe your hair already tangled a lot before and your locks want to do this kind of thing. It's an odd thing, but I know when I see it in my chair that you've been uncomfortable for a little bit with tighter locks, and then I'm gonna go and tighten them some more. I do, but I don't right away. I go through with a comb and I'll separate everything out and I'll do the thing I showed you. Where you grab the comb and you comb your lock up. Now, when they're really twisty at the base, I think I have one right up front that kind of feels tight like that. Let me see if I can find it. This one. So when they feel really twisty like that, you can kind of like see that like it combs those knots up off of your scalp. It's really nice. Now when I go to do a crochet up in there, that's gonna feel a lot better because it's up off the scalp a little bit, right? And so like when you're at home and you're doing that stuff, make sure you do that too. Also, when you're at home and you're not using a crochet hook and your hair's wanting to do this all the time inside of the base of your lock, one single lock, and all of the hairs want to do this really close to the scalp, comb those little knots right up off the scalp and get all of that tightness up off of your scalp and let your dreads flow again. Kind of like helping all those hairs that fell out in the telogen phase lock up in there. Then essentially the same thing's happening when I'm combing up and then crocheting everything in, as well as the same thing's happening when somebody at home is doing the freeform thing like this. Eventually you've gone through and stuck all of that hair that wasn't in the root into the root of the lock, and then eventually it's fallen out in the telogen phase and it winds up into the base of the lock. It seems like I'm repeating myself over and over and over again, but I am, because that's what we're doing. And so this is at-home maintenance, and I want you to catch that, like, the whole drift of it is that. This whole thing of me, like, taking the loose hair, roughing it up, sticking it into the base, leaving it there, combing it up in a couple of weeks, that's all for hair types that are more like straight, wavy, and curly. Anything that's after curly that gets into the kinky and coiled hair types, those are gonna require a little bit different of a thing, because when you get that curly hair that's more like thick and coarse, but it's really curly, twist and lock isn't really gonna work that great for it. You still need some roughing up. So some of this kind of stuff might help the combing up of that and like the locking up of that hair. Sometimes a crochet might help with that too. Just for some of you locticians and people at home who have this hair type that has a really stubborn, coarse, right? Tough. And so like there's a few things that have to kind of happen with it. But anyways, beyond that, if that's what we're doing, shoving and poking that in and then combing it up, well then the same thing by far is happening when you're just doing twist and lock with more fragile hair. Every single time you're taking it out, separating everything out, and you're twisting out at home, right? Most likely you've shampooed first, everything's wet, you're creating a wet set. Same thing that we're doing when we're palm rolling everything out before it air dries. You're creating this wet set with the spiral of your lock. So you want to go the way that your hair spirals, then you take all of the hair when it's damp and go around it. Now, the same thing is like going out night and you have straight, wavy, and curly hair types. Now you're doing this usually after you shampoo as well because it creates a wet set. It holds the hair there. So if you do it after you shampoo and then you go about getting dressed, by the time you go to pull your hair up, everything's dry and wet set. Like if you're doing twisting it out at your own leisure at home and you're actually twisting it out for maintenance, you're letting all that completely dry before you braid anything up. In that 3 to 4 weeks before you see your loctician, 2 to 3 weeks usually, but 3 to 4 is like your max. In that time frame where it's loose like this and you're doing this kind of stuff, that it's helping so much to keep your locks separated, to keep them spiraling, to keep them healthy, to keep those loose hairs that have fallen out in the telogen phase to stay in there. It's helping. Go in there and separate shit, man. Get it good. Because The whole point is to have them growing healthy and on their own. So as an idea, if you're twisting at home, that's kind of how you're doing it with that wet set. Well, we're also going through with the straight and wavy hair types and doing this thing that I showed you, but like it's spiraled and it's stuck in there and I've combed it up, and then now it's essentially doing what twist and lock is doing with finger manipulations, but for straight, wavy, and curly. So it's the same process, even in a sense, to continuously keep those hairs in the base and wound up in. Where somebody with really coarse hair, really curly coarse hair, really straight and coarse hair might root rub a whole lot. Somebody with fine and fragile hair, whether it's coily or straight, doesn't matter, might not root rub nearly at all. They might just do the thing with the comb and the shoving it in there and then combing it up every once in a while and leaving it alone. And then shampoos really help a lot. When you're shampooing, it's stripping the hairs of the oils and making everything grippy and grabby, and they're gonna do this thing a lot. Same thing like sea salt sprays are gonna do too. Sea salt sprays are great to utilize to help lock in that last 2 weeks before you see a loctician, or the last few days before you shampoo something out, right? Like, don't be wearing salt sprays in your hair all the time. Even people that surf rinse their hair when they get out of the salt water, but that salt water is there, and I don't know a surfer that doesn't have gorgeous fucking dreads, homies. Though I don't put a whole lot of pressure on products, nor do I like use things. I'm not really like that. If you've got something you really enjoy, use it. If you had something you really enjoyed before, you might still be using it with locs. The only difference between locs and what you had before is that you've woven it into a fabric, so maybe treat it as such. A big focus is your first 4 to 6 weeks, just like taking care of them nicely, maybe separating a little bit, making sure they're not growing together, but they're kind of stiff and tight every time you leave the loctician. After you've gotten them wet a little bit, you're focusing more on separating more often. And then when you get it wet, you obviously go through and stretch your locks back out before they air dry and make sure that everything's kind of like doing a thing, right, that you want it to, and separated. And then that's pretty much it. And like the vigorous stuff is left more for when you're doing this stuff at home and everything's always loose, right? And you're not doing crochet at home. If our main goal is to keep the hair in the lock growing as the hairs fall out, then by all rights, when our hair starts to get loose like this, and you can start sticking your finger in there and you're not going to a loctician, this stuff's pretty rough on you, you can start sticking your hair in there right through that base. Pull it through. The reason I show you with your fingers, you can do it with a latch hook too, and I've shown you with that. The reason I show you your fingers is because it's way easier. Not only is it way easier, your stuff should be loose enough to be able to do that often. Now you always want to shove it in from the direction of wherever it's coming from. So you don't ever want to go all the way around the lock with it and then stick it in. But if you do that over and over and you've got more pieces coming on, maybe take it out and rough it up a little bit. You can take that and shove it back through again. And now that's staying in there, and yeah, it kind of is a little odd and it's a little piece there, but like you're trying to keep that stuff in there the whole time. And the reason why is because eventually a bunch of those hairs are going to fall out within the next week or two. As you've gone through for like, a couple of weeks and you've started to go through your whole head, now you've gotten through the whole head, right? Now you're back over here again, working again. And you're like, oh, there's some loose, there's some blah, 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 whatever. But you grab it and you're like, oh, okay, it's been a few weeks. Now you've probably lost a good few hairs in there, 10 anyways, right? And you can take your comb and get right up in there and just comb up that base, because you're combing those loose hairs that have just fallen out in the telogen phase up into the base of the lock. It might take you a week to get your whole head done, being at home, dinking around every red light. You might shove a few hairs into one of them. Like, that's gonna be a great maintenance tool to add into you at that point in time. Now, crochet at home is what I wanted. I'm sure you guys have all been hanging out for that and wait. All right, let me go grab a crochet hook, homie. So, I like to use a 0.5 crochet hook when I do my own maintenance. I always tell anyone at home, always practice down here. And once you can actually get some stuff working down here, and I'm sure I've said it in other videos, once you actually get the things to do what you want them to do, well, by God, then maybe try it up at the base, right? And you want to be able to get the angle correct. Your angle needs to be the same way the dreadlock grows out of the head. So you want to be up and pulling those hairs down into the lock. You want to be going the same way as the dreadlock, going out and pulling those hairs into the dreadlock. You're going up and in and up and in. And essentially, ooh, that was bad. See, and that's the other part, is you'll break hair doing it yourself. So, you're really weaving it. You really do weave. Hair, you don't just go in and out willy-nilly with your crochet hook and hope that shit happens. It doesn't work that way. You're actually weaving something. I don't know how much of that's showing and how good it's working for you guys. Now is where we get into the longer hair part. And you gotta be pulling it down in. That's the thing, is you get this angle behind the chair that you can't get it on your own. Really, it's like, it's really hard to contort your fucking hands in the same manner to get the crochet hook to actually pull the hair in the manner that you want it to. Now, and that's like down and in. Now, hopefully that's pretty good. If you accidentally get something too tight on your own, it's going to eventually break years later on, because it's above and below starts to get weak and it'll break. And that's a way later on thing. But what I mean is, when you're doing it at home, you're way more susceptible to do stuff like that. Way more susceptible to breakage with your crochet hook, and way more susceptible to getting things too tight and too crocheted. It is a thing. Please have fun taking care of your locks at home, man. It's been a fun video to make, and I hope that it helps you guys. And maybe I didn't forget something this time, but I bet I did. Anyways, happy locking.
Dude, if you made it through that long ass video and got something out of it, I should be hitting your like button. But anyways, I'll catch you next time, guys. And I appreciate you guys watching it through.